Here we are with another edition of the Indusoft Web Studio video training series. In this video we're going to cover several of the active objects. This is going to be video one of several. And what we're going to cover in this video is the text object, the button object, and the push button object. So let's get started. Let's flip over here into Indusoft Web Studio. When last we left, I had created previously a header, a main, and a navigation screen, and edited the main screen. So before we get started on the active objects screen, I'm going to close the main screen if you haven't done so already and save that. I'm going to open up the template screen that we positioned and colored the background the way we wanted it, and then I'm going to save this as active objects. I'm going to ask you to not put a space in here, although you can, and it will probably work correctly. Later on, when we get into some of the web-based screen development, it's a good practice to not have spaces in your screen names. It just helps, makes it a little bit more compatible, although you can, and probably, if you did it, it wouldn't cause any problems, but it's good practice. So I'll click on Save. So now I have this as the active objects screen, and now I'm going to need a way to get to this. So I'm going to open up the navigation, copy my button for main down by holding the control key down and dragging it. That will have made a copy. And now I can double click on this. I can change the screen that this goes to by choosing this browse button here. I could manually type it in, but I'm going to do this by selecting the screen here and then go back to the button. Now alternatively, I could have, instead of back to the button, I could have dropped this down and gone to the button and changed the caption or the label that's on there to active objects. Now here I can put a space, or I can even put a carriage return in and drop that line down. The text that's on here does not dictate the functionality of this particular button. So once I have both of those configured, the command to open the screen active objects and the caption says active objects or labels the button, then I can save my navigation screen and I'll have a way to get to this screen. Now we're going to cover these text, button, and push button object. I'm going to skip the text box and do that in a later video, and I feel it's important to keep the button and the push button object configuration in the same training series. So text, here we can insert text, and you can see the tooltip says that pound signs are a little bit special. So the first thing that we're going to do is just put a text on the screen. Now, just watch what I just did here. I'm going to cancel this and select text. So I've single-clicked and released my mouse button, and now I click on the screen, and that will leave a cursor in that spot, and now I can just type. This is just text. So this text by itself doesn't do anything. It's just a label. It's a way to label columns or data on your screen, but it will not read or write data as it is. I am going to then place a text object below this that is comprised of just pound signs. And once I make pound signs are special in Indusoft Web Studio. Now we can use the pound signs to read or write values from tags. So you can see here that once I have pound signs, now I have the text data link animation available. If I go back to the text that does not have pound signs, you can see that the text data link is not available. Once, let me go into the properties of this text. If I go here, you can see that the caption is just text. If I want to edit that or change this and remove the word just, I can say this is text. I can align it left, center, and right. I can add a border to maybe make it a little bit easier to see. Change the border around that to a different color. I can even put a background and change the fonts of that. So I'll come back to that in just a moment. The text data link we'll get to in just a moment, but by having the pound signs, and if I was to go back to text data link and apply a text data link animation to it, and we'll get into the animations in another video, but this has now given me a text object with the text data link animation applied to it. And I can set up all of this. Again, we'll cover that animation in a different video. But another alternative to this is, let's say we had a temperature value that we wanted to display. I can type the word temperature, and notice that I still do not have the text data link animation available to me. If I hit enter and open up the properties of this, I can see that my caption is temperature, but here is a shortcut. Just by pressing this button, it will add a colon, a space, and 4 pound signs, and the text data link animation all to this object all at the same time, and leave me in the properties for that text data link animation. So if I click this, it's added the colon, the space, 4 pound signs, and left me in the text data link animation. Here I can put the tag that I want to on that, and it's done that as a convenience item. It saved me multiple mouse clicks and jumped me right into that. So that's a way to do that. So back here in this original text object, let me copy this, and I will turn off the border and turn off the background. One of the things we can do is jump here into fonts and change the type of font that it is. Maybe this is some other font that you have on your PC. You also need to make sure that that font is available on the runtime PC as well. So I'll go to a particular font here. I can see that that changes, and also within that fonts window you can change the color of the font. I'll change this to red, whether or not it's strikeout or underline, and change the size of that font. In addition to choosing the size here, you can also choose it by scaling the object this way. Sometimes that lets you fit it into right where you need it to be on the particular screen or object that you're working with. A couple things to note when you're working with pound signs. Let me copy this object down here and insert a couple extra pound signs. Now, as I get more and more pound signs, you're going to see more prevalent this space here that's after the pound signs. What that's indicating is that this is a variable width font. So, for example, the letter I takes up less space than the letter W. So we have to account for that space in the font. If you don't want to account for that, or want a little bit better representation of where that text is going to be, you can change your font to a font that is a fixed width font. Now, there are several. One that I happen to know of is Courier. So if I pick Courier as a font, say OK, you can see that that text goes right to the edge of the object itself. Another thing to note, when we lay down a new text object, maybe we're working with pound signs and we're towards the right edge of the screen. If I put pound signs on the right edge of that screen and I go right up to the edge of that screen, Intusoft Web Studio usually keeps us in the bounds of the screen. But if I create an object that's that close to the edge of the screen, you can see that I have the leftmost handles, the center handles, and the rightmost handles are off the edge of the screen. If I click on that and start to drag it, it drags it back so that the object is completely on the screen at that point, and I can't put it back to where it was. That is expected behavior. That's so that you don't get things off the edge of the screen. But please understand that's expected behavior at this point. Let's see. Let's now start to work with buttons. Let me move this text out of the way here a little bit, and I'll put the button object on the screen. Now, the button object has quite a lot of different uses in Intusoft Web Studio. Very typically, you're going to apply some type of animation to it, typically a command animation, but it can be used for graphics and different things that seem to be inviting for the operator to press because they have typically a beveled edge of some sort. Their functionality is similar to buttons you might see in a Windows environment, and people are getting more and more used to that. So as I place a button object on the screen, very often you would apply a command animation to it. In this video, I'm just going to cover the functionality of the button itself and not the animation. That will be done in another video. So as I place this button on the screen, you can see that I have text here, and maybe I'll put a tag on here, and I'll call this tag V1. And once I have that tag V1 label on there, it'll show me that. And again, I would normally do something with the command animation. This is a shortcut that I could do, apply this command animation. I could apply it here as well. So let's take a look at this tag v1. And with the text that I've placed here in this caption field, that does not determine any functionality at all whatsoever. But I'm going to drop down a line here and put curly brackets and put v1 inside of curly brackets, and that will show me the value of v1 as I change it during the rest of this video. I'm going to close this menu, or close this properties box, and it's going to prompt me v1 does not exist, and I'm going to mainly use it as a boolean, so I'm just going to change that or select that as a boolean. And so now I could say show tag v1 and then show its value right underneath it. Before I run that, I'm going to copy this by holding down the control key and copying this next to it. And I'm going to change this from 3D Sharp, which is the default in version 7.1. In earlier versions of Indusoft Web Studio, back in version 6.1, it was not the default to have this 3D Sharp or soft. I'm going to change this now to 3D soft. You can see that that changes the bevel of that a little bit. I'll copy this over here, change this to OS-like, which is operating system-like, which will change the look of this button depending on the operating system where it is running. And lastly, I'll copy this again and change it to standard. Now this is the Indusoft Web Studio standard that we used up until version 6.1. So all those have a little bit different look and feel to them. And the next thing to note is that I can go ahead and change the fonts, change the font color inside of that, and the size. So if you want to make that a little bit different, you can see that. Now one of the things that I'm going to do here is, right now the functionality of this button doesn't do anything, so I can't really demonstrate that. I guess I could go in here and add a command animation to this, and I'll make this toggle the tag, and I'll pull this from the list here, go to project, put a boolean v1, say OK. And now when I run this screen, this will also test our navigation to make sure we got that working right. I'll close all of my screens first, go to my active objects. That swapped in that actually opened up the active objects screen, and because it overlapped with the other one and it's replaced partial type, it closed automatically the main screen for me. Now I should be able to click on this button and I can see that value change. Now these other ones don't have the command animation applied to them, so they don't change. Let me exit out of this, go back into my development environment, and continue to work with these buttons here a little bit. So here I'm going to copy that button down. I'm going to go back to the button and brought up fonts. Let's bring up images here. If I apply an image to this button, I can manually type in or give a file path where that image will be located, or I can hit the Browse button here, and the Browse button will open up my training, and it will open up the screen folder, and any compatible images that I have that are either icon, bitmap, JPEG, GIF, or PNGs will be shown. Now I happen to have created in a third-party tool a maintenance bitmap icon that shows a little wrench and a screwdriver. I'm going to select that, and when I do that, it will place that on the button itself. It's part of that object. I don't have to put a separate picture object on top of the button. It's part of the button. I'm going to leave it as its default size. I do have the option to custom change the height and the width of that. And by default, it appears above the text. Well, what I'm going to do is move that to the left of the text and say OK. And now you can see what happens here is the image is aligned itself with the center of the button. Now I can go in here and I can offset that by a certain number of pixels. So let's say I want to move that 20 pixels from the center of the button. So that's moved this away by 20 pixels. Now this text is right now trying to adjust itself. And let me move this. Actually, I have this. Go back into the button here. And let me change this text to call maintenance. And here, what I can do is if I have this button as big as it can be, so all that text will fit on one line, it will. But if I go back to the advanced, I can tell it that it will wrap the text, and So if I do that, it will wrap the text into a couple of lines there. So if I go back under here in advanced, I can see that I have some other options to enable translation, multi-line, gray out, change the margin of the text, and things of that nature. Also here, I can change the background color of the object itself and change add the command and the alignment of the text on there as well. So there's just some additional features within the button. Oh, one more thing to show here is the images. When I've chosen a bitmap, I do have the option of transparent color. Some of the other image types, I don't have this option, but the transparent color, since that is a white background around that object, I'll choose white as a transparent color, click on OK, and now that goes away so I can see through that transparent color. So now let's move on to the push button type object. Now similar to the button type object, which allows you to add functionality to the buttons and cause actions or interactions, the button objects have more functionality kind of similar to what a Windows button would have. And we've added the command. Here we have the different functionality that we can add onto a button object, resetting tags, as well as doing anything with any of the scripting languages built in. So there's a lot of functionality there. Well, customers have asked us to add, instead of this type of functionality, how about functionality that mimics more of a real-world industrial automation push button like you might find on a machine. So that's why we've added this second type of button. Here is the push button object, and I'll select that and now drag that object onto the screen or window around that, a window out, and then it will show that object. And now here what we have is a tag expression. We have a momentary, maintained, or latched type button. It starts out by normally open as the default. And if we put in a tag in here, I'll keep that V1 going because I already have that. I can then go into the configuration, and here we can put text that will show on the button. I can have multiple lines of text on that. So maybe this will be momentary, and I'll just copy that and paste that over here. Now notice that this section here is the open and this is the closed. So what will happen is when this is closed or pressed, it will write a 1 to the tag that's on the previous screen, which will be V1, and when I release it, it will write this value or 0 to that tag. So let's go ahead and click on OK and go ahead and save this screen and run this. Now when I get into the active objects, I can press this and it writes a 1. You can see up above it, it's writing a 1. When I release it, it writes a 0. So again here, 1, 0. And notice it changes colors, and I can set those colors on that configuration screen as well. So let's go back into that object, and the colors were set here. I can change the blink for the rectangle itself, or for the button itself, or for the text itself. Change the fonts. So let's copy this button. It's this. Copy this button over. And now I'm going to change this to a maintained or a toggle. And I'll go and change this to toggle. Again, copy this, paste it over here. And now what that'll do is when I press it, it'll write a 1 and keep it there until I press it again. So I can release it and it will do its thing. So now when I run, so the difference between the momentary, I press, and as long as I'm holding it, it's written at 1, and it doesn't write the 0 until I release. Now with the toggle, I can press and release, and now it keeps that 1. I press and release again, and it changes it back to 0. So that's how that works. Let's go back into the development environment here, go into the objects, and I will copy this button over again. And now I will change it to latched. Now notice this reset field here is grayed out. When I select latched, now I get the reset field. I'm going to put a tag called reset in here, and that tag will be Boolean. Now the way that this works is this latched will allow me to use this button and it will not allow me to release it or reset it until the reset tag has been toggled. Actually, to the reset button has been set and released as well. So what I'm going to do is use a momentary for that. I'm going to copy this down here, and I'm going to change this to the reset tag and change the configurations. The caption will say reset, and we'll copy that to both. Press and release, and I will resize this button, kind of keep it close by this other one so you can see. Let's change the text on this one to say latched. And now we can see the functionality of this button. Let's go back into the runtime. I didn't open my menus, but that's okay. So here we have the momentary. I press and release that. The toggle turns that on and turns that off. If I use the latched, I can press and release it. And no matter how many times I click, it doesn't release it. If I hit reset, then it causes that thing to be reset, and now I can use it again until I hit the reset button. So that's more mimicking the functionality of a real-world push button. I hit Alt F4 to get back into my development environment because I ran without my menus. So let's do one more thing here. Let's copy this button down. Actually, I have a few more things to do. And on this button, under the config, we have the effect of 3D. We have that by default, and if you wanted to run on maybe a lower horsepower, maybe a Windows CE device that doesn't have a very powerful processor, you might want to change this to floating type, and when you do, that will make this a little bit lighter weight graphically, or graphically less intensive. It'll be a little bit faster on a lower horsepower CPU. Let's then copy this button one more time here, go back into the configuration. Another alternative is the rectangle with indicator. And now what we get is the use of these colors up here and the LED itself versus the button. The indicator drives that LED. Now let me add a V2 tag here. This V2 we don't have in the system yet. I'm going to make that a Boolean. And I'll copy this over here. I can remove this so we kind of get the understanding that these are related. And what I'll do is I'll tie this to V2, and that's going to be a momentary. And maybe here I'll put V2. And now what we can do is, I have V1 on there, V2 is the indicator. Yep. So I can show you that those two tags are independent of each other. So if you're on the active objects screen, I'm driving this V1 up here with the button itself, and V2 drives this LED up here, just so you can see that those are independent of each other. And it's quite often that might happen in the real world, but it's also common that these two tags would be tied to the same tag. Show you that again. I just changed that V2 that was here to V1. So now that when you run this, the same tag drives the indicator that's driven by the button. Some common uses of this might be start motor, and then this LED might be when the motor is up to full RPMs. You might get some feedback, or set this as a temperature, and then when everything is acknowledged back to the PLC, drive that LED from a separate tag. So some other quick things to point out in the button objects and many other objects within Indusoft Web Studio. The security field, we'll get to security later, but this will be a value between 0 and 255 that will let me disable these buttons if I don't have the right security level. And the key will allow me to work with the keyboard, either function keys or some of these other keys I can select, or I can choose a letter from the keyboard just by typing that in. So right now this will be used not only by touch or mouse, but by the letter A key. And you can apply some modifiers to that, key modifiers. Let's say I wanted this to be Control, Alt, and A. It would take Control, Alt, and A before that would be active. And of course, those are never enough for some users. So we have this little browse button here, and now we can have let's say the left shift only, the right control, and either the left or the alt key. So we'd have to hit all of those in the right combinations with the letter A to be able to get that key to work. So there's a lot of different functionality that can be used here, and throughout those different objects and buttons and whatnot. So there's text, the regular buttons, and we'll talk about the command and the animations later, and the push button objects. I think that covers it for this video. Thanks, and have a great day.